your national ambitions. I mean, speaking of
Yeah.
scale, you want to go national. Like, what is your high-level plan?
Creating a template that can then be replicated, copy and paste that business in a box in multiple geographies and scale it that way.
Welcome back to NEMT Experts. I've got Ross Peterson with me, who has recently left his gig at Modivcare as an executive and is now going on the transportation business side and has started RideToo out of Denver with a national ambition. Ross, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I love your podcast.
Thank you. And thanks for coming at us with in the NEMT in action phase. You're in your vehicle right now in between rides. Thanks for making the time.
I will note, safely parked, pulled over in a parking lot I'm on my break right now.
As we would expect, safely parked.
I could turn on my background so that, and I could pretend that I'm at my desk, but
no, this is way better. Are you kidding me? What kind of vehicle are you in?
This is a Ford Transit. It's a 2019. Yeah.
Can you show me around?
You want to see the whole thing? Yeah. Let's do it.
All right.
So it's a rear load. I bought this from a guy named, I had a LinkedIn post about it, but his name's Kirk. He ran a fleet in Portland, Oregon for 25 years. And this was the last vehicle he kept in his fleet. He donated the rest of it to a local nonprofit, but his dad had a disability and he thought he should keep one. His dad went into a nursing home about 1.5 years ago, and Kirk and I have stayed in touch. So when it became available, I said, hey, I'd like to buy it from you. So, your standard Ford Transit, rear load. Kirk made a few modifications to it.
Okay.
This grab bar right here doesn't come in a lot of the standard vehicles that I've seen. This is something that Kirk added. And, as a driver, you start to see the value of this immediately. When you're stepping in, you're usually coming from the back of the vehicle, right? So you're able to kind of swing around that pole much more efficiently. Same thing going out. This is, that's the direction you want to go. So it makes sense to have that there. And there's a few other things in this van that Kirk modified over the years to sort of fine tune his operation. And by having this van, I kind of feel like I'm starting on the shoulders of a giant.
Nice.
So to speak. Yeah.
What's the capacity of the van? So can it do, wheelchair? Can it do stretcher gurney?
I don't do stretcher gurney, not yet. And this van is not outfitted for that. So I've got 2 wheelchair positions, one in the back, one in the front. This is the short wheelbase. And I'm not sure that they make this in a passenger configuration anymore. But I've got 2 wheelchair positions and then 2 of these Friedman fold down seats. So I can have up to 4 ambulatory passengers and 1 wheelchair passenger, or I can have 2 ambulatory passengers and 2 wheelchair passengers.
Okay. Nice.
So, yeah, that's
it. Just looking vehicle, man.
Thanks.
How did you get to the name RideToo?
My wife came up with it. When I quit my job, we started thinking about this business pretty soon. And one of the first things we were kind of just toying with was, what about this name? What about that name? And we wanted something that implied inclusiveness. And RideToo got us there. It made sense. We were sitting on a couch one night and she said, what about RideToo? And we started playing around with it graphically. And yeah, it just made sense.
You can ride too. You can ride too.
That's right. Mobility for everyone.
Ross, tell us about how you got into the NEMT industry.
I've been in this industry for about 2 decades. It started when I was an intern at the Utah Transit Authority. I was working on light rail. This was around the Olympics. We were building a ton of light rail. And a colleague of mine was called up for active duty in Iraq, and they needed somebody to run some reports in the paratransit department. So I got to go downstairs and meet the folks in UTA's paratransit group, and I saw something that kind of changed my career. Upstairs, we were working on light rail projects that wouldn't see the light of day for 10 years, right? You're doing an environmental permit. The thing might not get built for 10 years. Downstairs, they were helping people today. They were making a difference in people's lives right in that moment. And that was really satisfying. So I did what I could to find my way into paratransit. Eventually started working in a company called Nelson Nygaard as a consultant. I worked under somebody that a lot of folks in this industry know, a gentleman named Will Rodman, who happens to be retiring this week. He is an expert in all things ADA paratransit, Medicaid NEMT, mobility management, took me under his wing and taught me a lot. I learned a ton from him and built a career in a broader section of transportation than just Medicaid NEMT, called human service transportation, which is any form of transportation for seniors, for people with disabilities. We're all familiar with Medicaid NEMT because it's typically the largest source of funding for rides for seniors and people with disabilities, but it's not the only source of funding. And I think a lot of the folks who've come on your podcast have experience in some of these other funding programs. A fairly large segment of the industry is veterans transportation, senior transportation programs, voc rehab. And a lot of what I was trying to do early on was coordinate these programs. But with Medicaid being the biggest piece of it, you really have to understand Medicaid. And as you start to learn about Medicaid NEMT, you start to learn that it's not really the way Medicaid NEMT was designed is not exactly a customer-friendly business model. A lot of the people I was meeting, when I would interview them to learn what are the barriers that they face to mobility, they would explain how they were accessing their Medicaid NEMT benefits, describing really long wait times at a call center, very high rates of transportation provider no-shows, an unacceptable number of negative interactions with NEMT drivers. And I decided, I'd like to try to influence this somehow. So I shifted my consulting work to focus on Medicaid NEMT, eventually found my way to Modivcare. I've skipped over a lot of details in getting to that point. But I think a lot of your listeners probably know who Modivcare is, and maybe that's a good touch point. I was there for about 3 years. Definitely got exposure to all of the facets of this industry at a national level and realized we need more companies that are operating wheelchair accessible services at a multi-state scale. That's how we address a lot of the quality issues, is through scale. There's no way you can train enough drivers. There's no way that you can really operate within the margins that are available in this industry and maintain high quality standards unless you have some level of scale. So what I'm doing with RideToo is building a company that can scale. Right now, we're teeny tiny. It's me, my co-founder, who I'll be announcing this week on LinkedIn, and one van. Hopefully we'll have 3 vans in September and 6 more drivers. But the business model is very intentional. I'm sure you have questions about it. So I'll stop there with my answer of how I got into this. But that was a little bit about the journey.
I love your journey. I love your reason for getting into it. And Ross, I think it speaks volumes about you that you are in your vehicle right now. Having worked at Modivcare for years, you are at the ground floor, literally, of your own NEMT business, doing everything yourself. And actually, before we get into anything else, I want to talk a bit about your national ambitions. I mean, speaking of scale, you want to go national. Like, what is your high-level plan?
Yeah. It kind of starts with fundamentals. So if you think about transportation businesses that have scaled recently, you might think of Uber, or you might think of Lyft. Those business models rely on independent contractors, 1099 drivers. And I don't think that business model will work for wheelchair accessible transportation. So my mind goes to, well, what is another business model that scales when the drivers need to be W-2 drivers and the training needs to focus on consistent quality and performance? To me, that business model is something more like a franchise model where W-2 employees are baked in. That's part of the business model. And the way that you scale is by creating a template that can then be replicated in a multi-threaded way, that you can then copy and paste that business in a box in multiple geographies and scale it that way.
And when you do that, is it going to be RideToo over here, RideToo over here, RideToo over here? Or is it going to be different NEMT businesses that you've franchised under the same operating model?
My assumption right now is that each franchise operates under a RideToo name, but I'm in the prototyping phase right now. Right now, I'm building that first restaurant before I know what the chain of restaurants will look like. If the brand isn't really the secret sauce, I'm stretching the burger analogies a little too far here, but if the brand isn't part of that secret sauce, then maybe it doesn't need to go along with it, and maybe it's more of the kind of core components of building a scalable wheelchair accessible transportation service. But I think that the branding does matter. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wearing it. I wouldn't be showing it the way that I am. I think that imagery and symbolism conveys something about a company. And for me, I want the brand to convey safety. I want the brand to convey comfort. We picked these colors because orange is warm and welcoming. It conveys a sense of comfort. Blue conveys a sense of seriousness and punctuality. All of these things are things that we want people to see when they see a RideToo van showing up. And so my guess is that, yeah, it'll be multiple RideToo branded franchises as we grow.
I like it. I like it. So Ross, how long have you opened your first branch of your prototyping phase of RideToo in Denver?
Yeah, we incorporated the company on February 19th, 2025, and performed our first ride on June 2nd. So we are in our infancy.
So you've been nearly 2 months into actually performing rides.
That's right.
Tell me about the kind of prototyping you're doing. You're saying, hey, this operation in Denver, we're going to make the kind of operation where we can replicate, right? Like, what are the sort of main pieces of the puzzle that you're putting in place that you want to then copy and paste elsewhere?
Yeah, the building blocks are things like insurance, vehicles, technology, and the human resources infrastructure for recruiting drivers, motivating drivers, keeping them plugged in, literally plugged into the digital side of the company. So, I come from a corporate background. I have a background in product development, understanding the flow of data. I'm building infrastructure behind the scenes that is ridiculous for a company of my size, but it makes sense when you think about what the ambition and what the plan is.
Give me some details around that. But what would be ridiculous for your size right now, but that's going to help you scale?
Thinking about how I can scale vehicle procurement. So the amount of time that I've spent trying to build relationships with different vehicle suppliers, I think is ridiculous for the number of vehicles that I'm currently buying. But that is a really important relationship to get right. And I think that that's a really important resource to be able to hand over to a future partner that is trying to build a business, to just say, hey, we've already got the vehicle spec. We already know how to operate this particular platform. We know how to scale with this particular platform. And we have a vendor that has a supply chain that is tuned to what we need.
And have you already, do you feel like you've fully solved that one and it's ready to be replicated? Like you've built that relationship, you've solved the vehicle procurement issue?
No, I have found multiple different vendors that I'm now ready to start testing and plan to buy vehicles from a few different places as I build that relationship.
Okay, so you're going to test out a couple of different vendors, methods of procuring, and see
Yep.
which one is the one you ultimately want to lean into.
Yep, that's right. And if
Okay.
any of you listening, I hope they, are hearing similar sort of ambition and plans to what we discussed, right? Because I know this is a small world, and I'm sure that some of the folks I'm talking to are listening to this video right now.
Yep. They certainly will be. They certainly will be. Any other details about things that you think are ridiculous, so to say, for your size right now, but are going to help you copy and paste?
Yeah, insurance is a big one. I think we're all just dismayed by the cost of it. And, I can come into this with super detailed policies and procedures, hand them over to my underwriter, and they don't care. It doesn't matter that I've got 20 years of experience in the industry. I am a startup to them, and I'm paying startup prices for insurance. So I've spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to find alternatives. And frankly, there aren't very many good alternatives out there. I think I've got a hunch on a couple of opportunities. Can't get into a ton of detail on it on this. But solving the insurance problem, it's a ridiculous situation, and it requires a ridiculous amount of time to address it.
What else you got that's ridiculous for right now?
Maybe not ridiculous is, I would say, the amount of joy I'm experiencing. I don't know. I feel so fortunate to have this opportunity to be this close to the customer and the end user. I know you've got a product background. Good products come when you're thinking about what the end user needs. And I feel, I guess I could say, a ridiculous amount of satisfaction out of being in this seat and having this kind of contact to the end user as I think about building this product. It's extremely satisfying.
I love that. I mean, in the long run, you're going to be stepping out of this role, stepping out of the vehicle, and be involved in copying and pasting and franchising and building this out nationally. What about the finances of actually paying for all this expansion? Like, have you sort of figured out what you're doing on that piece?
Before I get to any of that, the next thing I step into is dispatcher. Then I step into crew manager. There's sort of a roster of roles that I think a RideToo franchise needs. And I'm going to work every single one of those jobs before I move into that more corporate role. I think the good thing,
a man with 2 decades of experience in this industry. You know what's what. You know how it has to be done.
Well, and I've also had enough of a taste of dispatch to realize that's where the metaphorical rubber meets the road. Dispatch is where you make your on-time performance happen. Dispatch is where you keep your customers happy, because inevitably you have to communicate what happens out on the road. None of this goes to plan really ever. So I'm excited to be a full-time dispatcher for a considerable amount of time. But to get to the finance question, I think the silver lining of this industry is that it is a basic business, and banks know how to finance fleets. I don't need to go raise venture capital to build this business. I can build a profitable wheelchair accessible transportation service and show that profit and loss statement to a traditional bank, and I can finance vehicles. Maybe I made it sound like I'm building technology. I'm not building technology. I'm using commercial off-the-shelf products, and there will be some investment in integrating those off-the-shelf products so I have a cohesive system. But this is like I said, it's a basic business that can be financed with simple traditional loans. I am bringing some resources to the table myself. I'm bootstrapping my initial startup, and I'm certainly interested in strategic partnerships. I'm having those conversations with different partners right now. But the beauty is this can be financed without a complicated venture
capital or private equity strategy. And I'd like to maintain control of it. So I'm going to bootstrap it as long as I can. And it might slow us down a little bit, but I think that's okay.
Let's talk about the actual first, prototype that you're building out. You're going to step into all the rules. You've already started doing rides. Who do you do rides for? What's your business model? Talk to me about the actual rubber hitting the road right now.
Yeah. I think it's like a lot of the folks that you've had come on. It's a mix of broker work and private pay work. I'll give a shout out to a partner that I've really appreciated working with called Tootle. I don't know if you've come across them yet, but they're a wheelchair accessible transportation broker for private pay. So they're a private pay broker, and they've been excellent. They've given me quite a few rides, just enough volume to kind of get things rolling while I started up multiple contracts with traditional brokers in the Medicare space. Those are starting now. Those have been great. I've been able to cut my teeth on balancing the needs of multiple customers at the same time. I will say this. So in Colorado, there's currently a moratorium on Medicaid provider enrollments, and I can't participate in Colorado's Medicaid program. My understanding is that moratorium will be lifted later this year. So we're sort of in a period of uncertainty while we wait to see what happens with that moratorium. But once that goes live, we'll, hopefully get a Medicaid contract in the mix as well. And we'll continue our outreach to private pay providers, to facilities, and all of the, folks that most of your customers are already, reaching out to in other markets. It's not, that side of the business is not very different from what a lot of the folks that you've had on your podcast talk about.
Ross, how big do you want to scale this prototype that you have in Denver before going to the next geography? So
it's when I talk about the prototype is defined by a set of specific numbers. So there's a territory, a geographic area that I think can be served by a distinct number of vehicles. I'm not going to get into the exact number because I do think our numbers and our ratios are part of that secret sauce. But I think that if you take a given geographic area, there's a certain fleet size that is optimal to serve that geographic area. And there's a certain number of drivers and a certain number of administrative staff that assist those drivers in delivering services. And the whole concept is to optimize those numbers, to get to the right ratios where we have just enough overhead that our drivers are able to perform at their peak. I don't know if you've ever read The Goal or if you've got operational theory, but I'm trying to optimize for our most valuable resource, which is the driver. And I'm building infrastructure around that crew of drivers to get to just the right size for that territory, not any bigger, not any smaller, and prove that. That is what then gets replicated, is that geographic template that is supported by that certain number of staff and that certain fleet size and the infrastructure that's needed to keep them performing at the optimal level. That's the piece that I think is highly replicable.
And your vantage point and perspective on these issues is so rich with the data and what you saw during your years, especially at Modivcare, right? You've seen so many NEMT businesses all over the country. Do you feel like there were any number of them where you were like, hey, you know what? Like these particular NEMT businesses, they're pretty close to having something that could be replicated.
Yeah. No, I felt that way about Kirk's operation in Portland that I was telling you about him earlier. He's the guy I bought this van from. He's on my informal board of advisors and helping me out. I definitely saw a lot of companies that were doing it right. And I wished I could just copy and paste them within Modivcare's network. And in effect, that's what I'm trying to do, is just take those best practices, package them up in a way that can be replicated. But you mentioned it's informed by the data that I gained in my Medicaid experience. It goes way deeper than that. So before I was doing Medicaid work, I was doing public transportation work. I was doing coordination work across all of these different funding silos. And I think one of the key things that a lot of providers are missing out on right now is they're only focusing on the Medicaid funding source, or maybe they're only focusing on the private pay funding source. I think one of the key ingredients is that by building out our driver training standards and being very intentional about driver training, I can train my drivers to the highest standards across all of these different programs. And then I can accept funding from all of these different programs. So that within that geographic area that we were talking about, now I can maximize the density of rides within that area. And if I have more ride density, I have higher vehicle productivity. That's a big part of what we're optimizing against is we've got these assets. Let's keep them as busy as possible. That's how we make fares affordable without cutting corners through productivity.
And that's what helps you to grow even further within that same area. So it becomes like a virtuous cycle.
You got it.
Nice. Nice. Okay. Tell me this, Ross. You've started out your NEMT business having seen so much. What do you feel like, for the folks who want to start out and they had the goals to scale, maybe in some similar fashion to you, maybe not to multiple geographies, but even within their own geography, what are the common pitfalls that you've seen a lot of folks fall into, even the folks that work with a Modivcare or a big broker, these pitfalls where you knew, oh, I got to avoid this, I got to avoid that?
So being overly concentrated in one customer, relying too heavily on a single Medicaid contract or a single broker contract, I think there's so many risks associated with it. If a policy changes, or if a person in the dispatch office changes, and maybe they have a different favorite provider that they like to use. So I think diversification, I'm coming into this knowing that diversification is really important. We've already signed 3 broker contracts in addition to the private pay broker that we're working with, as well as the private pay contracts that we're able to go out and get. So, I think that's key. Don't get overly concentrated in one customer. I honestly think in some ways I can learn a lot from the small providers that are really hustling and being scrappy. I come from a different world. I come from a world where there's more investment and you've got a little bit more structure. But I think that mentality is actually beneficial in some ways, being able to really think about what do we need to invest in and what do we not need to invest in. But some of these companies sometimes I think make the wrong choices about what they're not investing in. I think it's a big mistake not to invest in driver training. I think it's a big mistake not to invest in, beyond just driver training, building the driver up. I've seen too many providers treat their drivers as if they're disposable or, that they can find a replacement. And I think that's a mistake. I think the continuity that passengers get from seeing the same faces every day builds your brand. And I think it's a really important part of longevity to have that kind of presence in the community, that your drivers get seen, they're recognized, both in the community and by you as their employer, that their efforts are recognized. The wages in this industry are very low, very, very low. So you've got to put effort into making sure that your drivers see the purpose of their work, feel recognized for what they're doing. And the folks that do this work, they're going out of their way to help people out. And, they do love their jobs, but we need to recognize them.
And I strongly commend you for doing this job. I mean, Ross, you are literally one of the only examples of someone who's come from working at a big broker company to now actually starting your own transportation business and rolling up your sleeves, right? Like you're in your vehicle right now. What are, if any, things that you didn't expect? Like you have all this knowledge, you've worked with so many NEMT businesses all over the country, you know, you start your own. What was unexpected for you?
I knew insurance was going to be expensive. I didn't know it was going to be this expensive. It's, I mean, it's the largest monthly line item on our profit and loss statement, and will be for the foreseeable future. I knew it, but it didn't really hit until I saw it in my, bank account, that amount leaving every month, and realizing, wow, that's the nut that we have to hit every single month just to break even. It's tough. And I know, I've heard other providers are paying even more than I am. And so I guess while I was surprised, I think this business model will help address it. Insurance rates are high because claims are high. Claims are high because some providers cut corners and they're not training their drivers the right way. They're not doing what they need to do to manage risk. And so we're all paying for it through our premiums. A scalable model that has a proven path for reducing claims will address it. And eventually we'll be able to put together a captive risk pool. We'll be able to put together a risk retention pool or a more innovative insurance product that reflects the lower loss runs that we're experiencing. And that'll go away. But man, that was the biggest surprise, is how very expensive insurance is. But we'll get through that. We'll address that through our risk management over time.
And I know that resonates with probably every single person listening to this. So power to you, Ross, for really being part of the solution and rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work.
Rob, you've got a great product. So for today, I was like, I'm going to put everything in Bambi, and it was smooth. So I like your product.
Thank you so much.
Run, Bambi, run.